Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something, honestly, pretty unprecedented. We're taking a highly complex legal case, complete with indictments, trial judgments, and an appeal ruling, and feeding the whole thing into 6 of the world's most advanced AI models. Our source material documents this wild intersection of law, technology, and human rights, and it gives us a really unique window into how artificial intelligence actually parses human justice. So, what exactly happens when you take Grok, Gemini, ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, and Qwen, and ask them to act as a panel of expert detectives on a real human court verdict? Like, can advanced language models objectively evaluate the logic, the evidence, and the procedural fairness of a human decision? Let's see exactly how these machines process the messy reality of the legal system in one very specific, highly scrutinized case.
To set the stakes here, 20. That's the number of months a scholar named Dr. Chen Jingyuan, a PhD researcher who focuses on complex systems, was sentenced to prison. And get this, according to the case documents, this sentence was handed down entirely for retweeting posts on an account with fewer than 100 followers. We're talking about 0 original posts, just a history of forwarding content from other people.
Here's exactly how the AIs broke this case down. First, we'll look at the case background, then the boundaries of the charge, the AI consensus on the substantive law, the procedural collapse, and finally, the cross-model digital consensus.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Case Background and AI Evaluation.
Because context is everything, right? The source documents lay out a very specific timeline. September 2022, Dr. Chen is arrested at his temporary residence, reportedly without a search warrant even being presented. Jump to January 2023, he's formally prosecuted for picking quarrels. By April, he's sentenced to 20 months in a closed-door trial. And then in May, his appeal is just dismissed without a hearing. The primary trigger for this entire ordeal? Simply retweeting art, some political opinions, and historical documents.
Which brings us to Section 2. The boundaries of the charge.
Now, before the AIs could actually evaluate the trial, they had to anchor themselves to the exact text of the law. Dr. Chen was charged with picking quarrels and provoking trouble on the internet. According to the Supreme Court's interpretation in the files, this charge has incredibly strict prerequisites. It absolutely requires the spreading of verifiable, false information, a clear subjective intent to cause trouble, and it must actually result in serious confusion in public order. The AI models use this exact definition as their rigorous baseline. And right out of the gate, the models flagged a massive issue with the evidence. The retweets were things like personal emotional expressions, political commentary, cartoons like an image of an umbrella girl. As the AIs rightly pointed out, you can't empirically prove a cartoon is false, you know? Opinions, art, and historical data just lack verifiable truth or falsity. So the models concluded that the very first requirement of the charge was entirely missing.
Okay, moving to Section 3, AI consensus on substantive law.
Since the content wasn't a fabricated fact, the models looked at the human element, the intent, and the impact. According to the documents, the human court's logic was basically that because Dr. Chen had a PhD and a high level of education, he possessed a subjective presumption of guilt, like he should have known better. Well, the AIs unanimously called this out. They did this brilliant straw man teardown, labeling it objective imputation, essentially assuming guilt and guilt by association just because he's highly educated, rather than looking at actual evidence of his state of mind.
Then they anchored their analysis in the data regarding that serious public confusion requirement. The court made this abstract claim that Dr. Chen's actions severely disrupted public order, but the AI legal logic pointed out the sheer absurdity here. I mean, his account had virtually 0 followers, and the retweets generated no engagement. There was 0 real-world chaos and absolutely 0 causality linking his clicks to any sort of public disruption.
This leads us to Section 4, Systematic Procedural Collapse.
Because, it's not just about what the law says. It's about how the justice system actually applies it. And here, the models just fired through a severe list of procedural violations. An unannounced home search, a closed-door trial with no legal justification. State secrets or personal privacy were not at issue here. A total deprivation of basic defense rights during the trial. And the second instance appeal hearing that was also held entirely in secret, without any cross-examination.
Now, listen to this exact quote from the appeal court's ruling. The appellant failed to submit new evidence to prove their appeal.
The AIs instantly threw a red flag on this as a dangerous, illegal inversion of the burden of proof. In standard criminal law, the prosecution has to prove guilt, right? But here, the appeal court dismissed the case because the defendant failed to submit new evidence to prove his own innocence. The AIs noted this fundamentally shatters the foundational presumption of innocence. Finally, Section 5, Cross-Model Digital Consensus.
It is genuinely fascinating to see how 6 different algorithms evaluated the exact same human documents because they actually adopted totally distinct analytical personas. Gemini went deep into philosophical insights, focusing on subjective intent and how Dr. Chen's background informed his judgment. ChatGPT systematically mapped out the chain of procedural errors, and DeepSeek, it zeroed right in on technical policy, showing exactly how the legal boundaries of fabricated information were stretched beyond recognition.
The other 3 models took equally compelling approaches. Qwen acted like this veteran frontline defense lawyer, giving practical remedies and a checklist of missing evidence. Grok zoomed way out to a macro-civilizational view, framing the case against global human rights standards. And Copilot provided this direct, visual mapping, pointing straight from the court's flaws to the specific statutes that were violated.
But here's the crazy part. Despite those completely different analytical focuses, all 6 models reached a powerful, unanimous conclusion. The sources call this a digital rule of law consensus. Every single one of them agreed there was a complete lack of substantive elements for the crime. They all critiqued the subjective presumption of guilt, noted the total procedural justice collapse, and highlighted the infringement upon basic constitutional freedoms. So I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought derived directly from the source material. Law must be believed in, otherwise it is useless. This entire experiment really forces us to ask a critical question about our future. What happens to justice when the flaws in human law and its application are so systematically and unanimously dismantled by the very machines we build? Thanks for joining this explainer.